Okay, hello everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Larkin Owl Booksellers virtually. We have some people that haven't joined us before, so I'm so happy that you're with us. We are coming at you from Georgetown, Texas, inside the store. And my name is Jane Estes. I'm the general manager and co-founder of Larkin Owl Booksellers with 9 other women. And I'm so excited about this event. I almost can't stand it. You're in for a fascinating conversation this evening, I promise, between our 2 guests for the next hour. And we'll take your questions toward the end of the hour. So save those up, put them in the ask a question box at the bottom of the screen, not so much the chat box. It's a little easier for us to monitor the question box for questions. Okay, so and Dr. Mann and I do not have a mask, but we are fully vaccinated and past our 2-week time. So don't think that we're that much of a rogue group here. We have our limits, you know. So the Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness was one of my favorite books last year, and it reads like a thriller. It's a memoir, and the author, Sarah Ramey, is with us this evening. She's a writer and musician who's known as Wolf Larsen. So look that up, everybody. Living in Washington, D.C., she's an activist and advocate for illnesses like ME/CFS. We're going to learn more about that, I bet. Fibromyalgia, Ehlers Danlos, dysautonomia. I'm not going to get that right.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Lyme and long COVID. The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness is her debut book and was chosen as an Amazon editor's pick for best memoirs. Sarah is the recipient of a 2018 Whiting Grant for nonfiction, and she has been featured in the Paris Review. I love that one. Ms. Magazine, love that one too. Salon, The Atlantic, and the Washington Post. Very exciting. The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness was a starred selection for Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Reviews, and Booklist, and it was chosen as one of the best books of 2020 by Bookpage and me. So Sarah graduated. Sarah was waiting to know that too, by the way. Yeah. Sarah graduated from, is it Bowdoin College?
Yes.
Okay, Bowdoin College in 2003, received an MFA in creative nonfiction writing from Columbia University in 2007, and worked on President Obama's 2008 campaign. Like so many invisible illnesses, she has done all of this while living with severe chronic illness and pain, and she salutes everyone who's doing the same. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. We're so happy you're here. Really, thank you for the time. And so interviewing and having a conversation with Sarah today is Dr. Christine Edie Mann, and she, right here, she's a family practice physician in Cedar Park, Texas, with 30 years experience training and working in healthcare. She is the daughter and granddaughter of veterans, a wife and mother of 3, and was a single mother during medical school. You need an award for that too. And she was a small business owner for 11 years. Dr. Mann has been involved in various community service and political activities for 2 decades, working at the local, state, and federal levels to enact policies that benefit the community, and we're all very grateful to you for that. She's a voter registrar and has worked on several local and state level campaigns, helping to elect Democrats in her district. She served as a community volunteer for CASA, which is Court Appointed
Special Advocate,
and sat on the Williamson County American Heart Association Board of Directors. She's past president of the Democratic Women of Williamson County and a member of the Georgetown Community Forum Board, where she has worked across the aisle holding community events that bring participants from both parties together. In 2018 and 2020, she ran for U.S. Congress in Texas 31, advancing to the Democratic runoff in both races. So welcome, both of you. And
Great
so
to be here.
Yep, a little clap. So how this is going to work, I'm going to scoot off screen, and these 2 lovely people are going to have the conversation, and I'll be the one kind of feeding questions toward the end. I'll read them, and then y'all continue your discussion. And thank you. So let's get started.
Yes. Well,
thank you to everyone who is tuned in, and thank you so much to Sarah for being here tonight. I am so excited to be a part of this conversation. And so I'm just going to dive right in because I have quite a few questions, and I imagine the audience will too. So we'll just get started. So my first question has to do with how you've done since you finished the book. You were tortured by the medical system, emotionally, physically, mentally. And towards the end of the book, you seem to be starting on a little bit of a slow recovery. And so we just want to catch up with you. And how have you been doing since the book came out?
Well, I just want to note that when I hear a physician say, you have been tortured by the medical system, it genuinely, like I tear up a little bit to have that acknowledged, because that is true, but that's not something that's been reflected back to me, especially by physicians very often. So I'm all verklempt already. So thank you for that. And I want to give that to anybody else in the audience or who watches this later, who has a similar illness to mine and has had a similar experience of, being mistreated in the medical system, that you also deserve that type of acknowledgement. So this is a great question about where I am now. And I thought that, so what I've been doing in a lot of these talks is to give a little bit of an overview of certainly what's wrong and has been wrong with me, and which kind of requires talking a little bit about what the illnesses are to begin with, that this book is about, because most people are pretty unfamiliar with this type of diagnosis. They have a friend or a sister, an aunt, who has a lot of these problems, and that they maybe don't see very often anymore, and they know that something is wrong, but they don't really know what it's like. So those diagnoses are chronic fatigue syndrome, which is also called myalgic encephalomyelitis. I'll refer to it as ME/CFS as for short. There's fibromyalgia, there's Ehlers Danlos, there's mast cell activation syndrome, there's dysautonomia. There's a lot of different autoimmune diseases as well are in this category, both because it's common to have them as a comorbidity, but also because it's really common to have the same experience of the medical system with an autoimmune disease. So the book is really about those syndromes. I have ME/CFS and complex regional pain syndrome and dysautonomia and some other things. But the book is really about this, not just my story, it's my story, and then how it became really clear to me that this was not just my own story, that this is the story of so many people who think also that they're the only one that this has ever happened to, and that their bad experience in medicine maybe is because of them, or they are causing the doctor to treat them this way, or that they just have this one freak illness that nobody can understand. But that's actually that's the norm if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, or a lot of these illnesses. So that's kind of what the book is about. And then the way it began for me is I was a perfectly healthy college student. I was a senior, and I just had a urinary tract infection, but otherwise very, very active. I was the director of the school musical and the head of the a cappella group and a singer in a band, and just very, very active. And but I had a urinary tract infection that wouldn't go away. And so I finally, when I went home for Christmas, I went to see a sort of top-level urologist in Washington, D.C., and he decided that the procedure that needed to be done was called a urethral dilation. And the book begins here, and which is a way of making sure that the reader, that this is the right book, that you're in the right place, because I just wanted them to make sure, if you're okay with this, then you'll be okay with the rest of it. If you're not okay with this, then I wouldn't pass go. Anyway, so it opens with this scene of me and this doctor, and the long and short of it is that procedure went wrong, and I went into septic shock and just became extremely sick. I had to be hospitalized for about a week, and developed very severe vaginal and pelvic pain on the left side. And Also myalgias all over, like muscle pain everywhere. My colon stopped functioning. Just a real systemic horrible problem in addition to all of this very severe pain. And a lot of doctors, my parents were both doctors, so a lot of doctors came to see me and to try to think through what had happened. But, the urologist insisted that nothing had gone wrong. And so we were just left with a lot of questions and couldn't understand why this had happened. But everyone assumed, and I had believed, that I would just get better and better, that this was a bad event, that I would just go back to school and resume being a healthy, active, normal young lady. And that is not what happened. I went back to school and was sleeping 18 hours a day, felt like I had the flu constantly, my muscles ached and burned, my colon had stopped functioning entirely, the vaginal and bladder pain spread out for my whole abdomen and very, very severe. And just a whole lot of other problems, very sensitive to everything, a lot of digestive problems. So suddenly I am very sick, but with no clear understanding of why. And so I went to a million doctors to try to figure it out, and nobody could figure it out. And so in the absence of any positive blood tests or any other sort of positive diagnoses, I started to get a new diagnosis from different physicians, which is that, as one doctor said, like so many young women her age, Sarah's problem is psychological. And that became like a consensus diagnosis for most physicians that I would go see, either explicitly or implicitly in the tone they were using with me. And that is the story of virtually everyone that has one of these, that has chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, on and on. And that story of basically being fine and having some trigger event set off this cascade of so many different symptoms and multi-system problems and just so many different issues. That again is the norm. That's like what everybody like me kind of experiences. Some people have like a slow creep where it does come up over time and there's no triggering event, or it's a slow creep and then it explodes with a triggering event. Some people have that as well. And so the long short of my story is that went on, that was 18 years ago, and to greater and lesser degrees, all of those things have been with me the whole time. To the greater extent, I was totally bedridden, had to be taken care of by my mom in a wheelchair, very, very, very sick. And then, as you mentioned, towards the end of the book, I did some things that kind of got me out of like the very worst part of it, where I could get up like this and like a prairie dog, like pop out in the hole and like be able to do like one thing a day, essentially, like do an event like this or do my laundry or cook dinner, but like not all three of those things. Like that's part of having chronic fatigue syndrome, is your energy is so limited. Even if you look absolutely fine, your energy is actually extremely limited. And so that's kind of where I am today. I have very, very limited energy, but I'm not in this like undead, like liminal space between life and death, which is really what severe CFS, ME/CFS is like. I also have very severe chronic pain from the original incident in the vagina and the bladder and the abdomen, the spine. It's something called complex regional pain syndrome, which is an extremely painful pain syndrome. It feels like somebody has peeled back a layer of skin and then just left it that way, or rubbed in some cayenne pepper. It's very bad. And then I also have an ileostomy because my colon just had no independent function. And so instead of using laxatives, which is what I did for so long, we eventually gave me an ileostomy, which is like an external bag for your poop. It's like a colostomy bag. So those are sort of like the three main things, which you would never know, because I know from the choir that follows me around all the time, I don't look sick, and but I am, and so that's the very, very long answer to your question, which is I find it's usually helpful for me to kind of front load all of that so that I don't get to the end and people are like, it's great to see that you're 100% recovered.
Right.
Oh no, I failed.
Right. Well, so you mentioned just now that you are able to get yourself up and function for an event like this, or to cook a meal here and there. So give us an idea about, after doing an event like this, what's your recovery look like? How long does that take for you to get back to where you can do another getting up and doing something?
Yeah, so for me now, it takes about a day. Like I definitely couldn't do something after this, and it really wouldn't matter how great it was. Like if my best friend was like getting married in like a flash wedding, like 2 blocks away, I'd probably have to say like, I don't think that I can go, or I would have to know that I was going to be in a very severe crash for at least a week or 2 weeks where I couldn't do anything at all. And that's very common for ME/CFS. This is not a great name, but it's called post-exertional malaise. And it's basically that you can't stretch the rubber band very far. The farther you stretch it, the harder it snaps back against you. And so for example, like I try to exercise a little bit, because that does, in my case, this is not true for all ME/CFS patients. In my case, it does help me a little bit to do a little bit of activity. It improves my overall health, but I know exactly where the edge is. And if I go past that, then it causes the post-exertional malaise. So it takes, if I do something like this, which is kind of like a big thing for me, that would take about 24 hours to recover. But that's pretty good compared to a lot of people that have this disease. I've had some friends reach out to me and they're like, you are so lucky that you can do that you're able to even do that. And that's true. Which I know, because I was in that much, much more severe place myself. And I could never have even imagine doing something like this.
Well, as I was reading the book, I got the sense and kind of noticed a tone that there was a bit of a conciliatory tone, like as if you were apologetic for talking about your illness, or apologetic about what you have gone through. And it kind of suggested that you might be worried that you were going to upset people by writing about your experience, and that people might be upset with you or angry with you. Tell us a little bit about that, and tell us, did you get any backlash or any people getting upset with you for sharing your story?
Yeah, so this is such an interesting idea, because I certainly don't feel apologetic about being sick or about writing about any of these things. But I know exactly what you're talking about on the page. I made a decision kind of early on as a narrator of like, okay, what narrative character am I gonna play? And which for me, it felt, so it's written in the second person. So it's written like to you, like the royal you. And in my mind, I had sort of 3 yous in mind. There's the you that's a patient that's like me. Then there's, I call us womies. It's a woman with a mysterious illness, or a momie, a man with a mysterious illness, or a pomie, person with a mysterious illness. Just to have a name, to not have to list all those syndromes all the time. So a WOMI is probably the primary reader for this book, but then the second group would be like the para-WOMI community, like the people around the WOMI, their caretakers, their friends, their family. And then the third is the medical community. So for the first group, for people like me have been through, as you noted, a tremendous amount of trauma. And I have a lot of trouble reading other books about illness or about trauma, especially if it's like similar to mine. And so it felt very important to me to take really, really good care of the reader on the page. And so not so much like apologizing for what's coming, but really saying like, okay, so with your permission, I'm going to take you into this really horrible, no good thing. Or I know that not everybody loves to read about vaginas and poop, but that's what we're going to do. I hope that that's okay. It's just kind of a way to like take the like brutalness or the grossness or whatever, you know, because not everybody is a physician, right? Not everybody is like comfortable with that. And I wanted to take that into account, especially for the Parawomi community, that it's not for everyone, but I really wanted it to be for everyone. Like I really wanted it to be something that anybody could read. That's also kind of why it's written in that thriller style. I really wanted to just be very mainstream, page-turnery type of book that's not just for WOMs or their doctors. That's like for anybody that's like passing by, because I want not people to like read my book. I want people to read about us and to understand us better. And so making it as accessible as possible was like very important, like too important to me. Like I feel like I was hyper vigilant about that all the time. I was like, will this be okay? Will they turn away? Will they put it down if I go into this really difficult vaginal story? You know, how do I make it more comfortable for them? Which so I know what you mean, that there is sort of like a tone of saying like, if you'll just excuse me while we do X, Y, and Z, instead of just like dumping it on that, because there's a lot of memoir that's very like, here's my story, here's like everything that happened, and that can be really effective. But for me, that's kind of not how I am. I'm not like, here I am, loud and proud, and like, you can just deal with it. I'm a lot more, you know, like making sure everybody feels okay. Like, so I think that comes through a lot in the text as well. But I also, that feels good to me to like make sure, well, we're being visited by my cat. Hold on. My cat, she wants to show you her butt. That's her big thing. She'll probably do that a couple of times. Yeah, but then, last thing I would say about that is the medical community. This is where, because I've been writing this book since 2005, really, and way back in 2005, there was no communal sense of the importance of like wellness or nutrition, or which I talk about in the book. Like, there was some, but nowhere near where it's like now, where it's like you can't swing a cat without hitting like a wellness product or advertisement in your podcasts or whatever it is. And that just was not the case. Like, I was really way off, like a satellite person around my friends who were like, maybe went to a yoga class or something, but they weren't gonna like really get into like taking care of themselves. Whereas a lot of people who have these chronic illnesses, they're the ones, in my opinion, that have kind of driven the explosion of the wellness movement. Like, that's where that has come from. And then I think people around them are like, oh, that stuff is, I wouldn't mind, getting better sleep, or like feeling better if I change my diet a little bit. But when I was writing, that didn't change really until like 2015, 2016, at least in my experience of the world. And so when I was writing about a lot of those things and about these illnesses, which also haven't really been taken that seriously until very, very, very recently, I was concerned about the way that especially a very skeptical healthcare practitioner would receive a lot of this stuff. I really didn't want them to just be like, this woo-woo stuff, and like just chuck it out, because I was like uncritically presenting a bunch of things from the wellness world or from alternative health. It felt important to me to like acknowledge some of the things that are not great about alternative health, and that there is a lot of nonsense, and that's true, but that can exist at the same time as there being some really important stuff that's actually hasn't been incorporated into conventional medicine, which it should. Now, I would say that that's changed a lot. Like, even just I finished writing in 2018, and like even just in the last 3 years, I'm like, this is incredible stuff to be watching. Kind of the same doctors that like made fun of me for coming to them about, should I change my diet or something, I'm still on their newsletters, like send out all this stuff about gut health and the radical importance of gut health. And I'm like, I said that to you. You made fun of me to my face.
I did that.
Like, so, but I know what you mean though, because I did feel very concerned about making sure that I was not uncritically, just presenting a bunch of stuff from the wellness side of the spectrum. So, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, you did a really good job with that. So I'm going to show everyone. This is my copy of the book. And I agreed to do this before I read it. And I went into reading the book thinking, okay, this is going to make me mad. There's going to be stuff, and it's going to be just another one of those books where it's just negative towards the medical system. So I sat down with my highlighter and a pen, and I started marking pages of things where I was like, no, that's not right. That's not right. And I got to page 22. And by page 22, I was like, oh my God, she's right. That's right. And that's right. And that's right. And that's right. And I put down my highlighter and I put down my pen and I just read it straight through. So you did, in my opinion, as a medical practitioner, a really, really good job of getting that tone and that balance right, that there's good things, there's bad things. You shouldn't go all one way. And you have to pick and choose those things that make sense to you and that work for you. So kudos to you for that. It was really eye-opening for me. So
thanks. That's good to hear, because as I've said, it's like my relationship with physicians, is fraught, to say the least.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
All right. So next question. Short of finding a functional medicine doctor, which you talked about a lot in the book, in which for those of you who aren't familiar with functional medicine, there's not a lot of them. I am not a functional medicine doctor. I am familiar with the term, but they're hard to find. Are there any immediate steps that WOMIs can take when they do find a doctor who seems willing to listen and work with them? I can envision things that would be useful from my perspective as a doctor, but I'm wondering what you would recommend to other women who are suffering that would enhance their communication with their doctors.
Yeah, so this is actually, I'll give my answer, but I would actually really love to hear from you on this, because this is, I think, the number one question that people like me have, which is, okay, so I can't find a functional medicine or an integrative medicine doctor that will take care of me, or I can't afford it, or whatever the reason is. There's a lot of good reasons to not be able to work with somebody that takes these problems seriously. So how do I get the most out of working with a conventionally trained doctor or just a non-integrative doctor? So I would say one thing that I do think is worthwhile for a patient to do. This is not about how to get the most out of your doctor. This is about like the work before you go to the doctor, which is, I think it is really worth, if you have these symptoms but you do not have a diagnosis yet, really looking up some of the things that we brought up, ME/CFS, mast cell activation, POTS, really looking for yourself to see, like, do you feel like you match with any of these things? Because that will help you look in your area for if there is anyone that specializes in any of these types of problems, which is probably not the case, but it could be. There are more and more people that are at least have like gone back to do some continuing education on some of these things and are better about this. Because to me, that if you go to see a regular doctor, I think there was a study recently that said 90% of all conventionally trained doctors receive 0 hours of training on chronic fatigue syndrome. And so, of course, you're probably gonna have like a antagonistic relationship with that person, because they would have been trained. If it was like a serious problem, they would have gotten that training in school. I think that's how they think about, a lot of people think about it. So I think if it is at all possible to find somebody in a 50-mile radius who has some familiarity with these problems, that is worth doing, because even to just save yourself the emotional pain of being dismissed or told that you're a malingerer or hypochondriac, all these things like that really starts to compound over time. And I want to protect as many patients from experiencing that as possible. In the absence of that, the next thing that I would do is when you're looking for a doctor, to try to screen for compassion. That is something you can actually look at, like look at different people's, whatever, like not very helpful, like vitals.com and things like that. But those things do tend to, if somebody's like really, really compassionate, those sites do tend to, people will say that. And that's helped me to find doctors who may not know technically what to do, but at least they are not going to add to the emotional burden of being treated poorly. And then you can start to work with them, at least to help you maybe with pain management, or at least to be the central person that's helping you find other specialists that might be able to help you. That I think that's all really helpful. But in terms of specifically, once you find a compassionate person, what you can actually do with them, like that's something I would love to hear more from you about what you think about that, because I know there's not great answers here.
Yeah, I mean, I understand from my own perspective that can be challenging. I have an autoimmune disorder myself, and when I found the physician that I wanted to work with on that autoimmune disorder, and then found out later that my insurance was changing and I was going to have to change doctors, it threw me into a tailspin. I was very, very distressed about that. And I can only imagine what that's like to do that for decades. That's just got to be so traumatic. So, from a physician perspective, giving advice out to people looking for a compassionate doctor, there's a couple of very practical things that I would say. The first is I would call the physician's office and ask how much time is allotted for a new patient. Because I've got colleagues that schedule 15-minute appointments all day, every day, no matter what the illness is, no matter what the status is. And that's, to me, that's crazy. I would never, ever do that. In my office, it's a 40-minute appointment for a new patient, period. Doesn't matter if you're coming in with a runny nose or a list of 15 things. We start with a 40-minute appointment so we can get to know people and give them the time that they need so that they can figure out whether or not I'm going to be a good fit for them. So that would be one of the questions that I would ask. I would then ask, if I would like to schedule more time, can you extend that appointment and make it longer? So in my office, we would say, yes, we can give you an hour, and then you would have that additional time to spend with that physician to get a little bit more one-on-one time. And then going a little bit further, when you have that first visit with that doctor, do they sit down in the room? Which that sounds strange to some people, but there's actually just a conversation about this on Twitter that I was in, where a doctor was talking about how he sits down when he is talking to patients, and he gets people that are amazed that he would take the time to sit down. There's research that shows that there's benefit to having your physician sit down when they're in the room. So if your physician doesn't sit down in the room, I wouldn't go back to that physician again. That's another little quick, easy thing.
That's a great one. Yeah.
The rest of it gets really hard, because I think that a lot of what has to happen for patients who have these very complex, very challenging issues is that there has to be a relationship built over time. It's one of the things I really, really like about family medicine. I've got kids that I was there for their birth that are graduating from high school and going to college and having their own kids now. And so I've had decades of time to get to know people. And I think that just makes a huge difference in the ability to get to know someone. And I think something that you hit on is exactly right. You may not have, like, if you come to me as a WOMI. I can probably deal with a 1 through a 3. For those of you who haven't read the book, Sarah has done this great scale of WOMIs from a 1, which is pretty functional. I would call myself right now probably a 1, to a 5, which is near death and maybe wishing for death at that point. And, there's a scale in between. And so for a physician like myself, I have WOMI 5s in my office, but I'm not the person that is guiding their care. I'm not trained to do it. But I can sit and I can listen and I can say, wow, that's terrible what you're going through. And it's amazing how big of a deal that is for patients who are going through that, just to have that simple recognition that this is a horrible, horrible condition that you've got, whatever that condition is. And so having that hub person, as you mentioned.
You'll probably be the first physician that's ever said that to them. Like, it is so, so rare to hear that like when it happens, it's like, even if you're very sick, it's like all that you can do not to leap across the desk and like jump into their lap, because it's so rare. And as we've said many times, that like, man, the trauma of being disbelieved or called a liar or malingerer or a hypochondriac or any of these horrible, horrible things that from a person that you respect, like a doctor, that has a really, really corrosive effect on your psyche over time. And so to have a doctor that just says, I hear you, I believe you, this is terrible, I'm acknowledging that this is terrible, that like is so, it's such a balm, and it just can't be overstated. I've talked to a lot of like physicians groups that they're like, well, but if nothing is known about how to actually treat patients, like what are we actually going to do differently? I'm like, well, are you doing like exactly what you just said? Like, are you reflecting back to them that you believe them, that you get that this is really bad, and maybe that that this area of medicine is like pretty understudied and underfunded, and so that's why there aren't great options, and that's not their fault, that's the system's fault. Like, that can just be, at least that does what the physician is supposed to do, which is to prevent harm, is to, because there's so much harm that is done from the disbelief, the sort of the almost aggressive disbelief that you get from a lot of doctors. And so just that, I always say, I'm like, and that's something nobody needs to like go back to school for that. That can change like today. Like, you don't have to do anything.
You kind of do, because it's hard as a doctor to say, I can't help with what's going on. I feel like I go home at the end of the day feeling like I've done nothing, but I'm getting feedback from those patients that even that acknowledgement is helpful. So, I have to self-reflect myself and say, you know what, you listened, and maybe you can't solve it, but
There's a very loud thunderstorm happening outside. Sorry, you can hear it. Sorry.
We're going to be close to audience question time. So I wanted to get, like, for me, what the most important question is from my standpoint. So the conclusion to me in your book is that systemic change is needed. Like, everything needs to get fixed. Any thoughts about how you envision that happening and what that looks like to you? Wholesale change of the medical system. What does that look like to you?
Yeah. So I think there's there's a lot. This is a big question, but the three things that I would say are most pressing. The first is, I really think, like, mandatory re-education about chronic fatigue syndrome at the very least. And then, because like even when you just start there, that you usually end up learning about, because there's in the literature about ME/CFS, like from CDC, from like now all the places that are starting to change their messaging. Like, so side note, the CDC, when I first started book promotion last year, was still had almost no information on their site about ME/CFS. And it just had like a little, like a 2-sentence thing that's like, fatigue that's not solved by, sleep or, getting refreshing sleep. And then the treatments that they were recommending, the only treatments were cognitive behavioral therapy. So going to see a psychiatrist or psychologist, and exercise, and to exercise your way out of it. And like I said, exercise can be helpful, but for a lot of people, it can be harmful, and it's not curative for most people. That's been disproven by all the studies done in that area. Anyway, now the CDC last June, and this is a direct response to the emergence of long COVID, which is very, very similar, if not the same thing, to ME/CFS. Because of that, the CDC, I think, felt caught out that like suddenly all these people were like, ME/CFS, what's that? And then would go to the site and be like, well, what's this? There's nothing here. You're telling me that my problem after getting COVID is that I need to get therapy or exercise more? Like, that's really the things that you have to say to me about this illness? So now they have this very robust, like 6-page thing that's like all about what's known about chronic fatigue syndrome, like all the different types of potential therapies. It's pretty extensive for the CDC. And so that being the case, to me, it feels really important for there to be like a bulletin that goes out that's like, sort of putting those two things together. 90% of physicians did not receive training in this area, but the CDC, not like Sarah Ramey, not like this fringe integrative medicine clinic, like the CDC has all of this important stuff to say that I agree with everything that they have to say on their new 6-page summary. So I think re-educating doctors about ME/CFS is like a starting place, just because I really think that like once you change your mind about like one of them, it's very difficult to stay dug in about the rest of them. That's like, okay, so these people are legitimate, but those ones are all still hypochondriacs and malingerers. Right. So I think that's number one. Number two is the one we already just said, which is really talking to doctors about like, even if you don't go and re-educate yourself about the medical side of things, that the way that we're treating these patients, it has got to change. Like we have got to start treating these patients with belief, compassion, and reflecting back to them the reality of how bad it is, because that's like the very least that like any interaction with like a serious illness, like just having, I just wrote a social media post about this a couple weeks ago, about just having the appropriate response from people around you is totally missing. Like when I say to somebody, I have ME/CFS, they're usually like, well, what's that? Or like, I don't buy it, or something like that, when it really should be, oh my God, oh shit, I am so sorry to hear that. Can I bring food by on Sunday? Or something that we would do for somebody that is really struggling with some type of disability. So I think those re-education about ME/CFS, compassion, and then I think that this is, as I said, this is already happening. The way that traditional medicine is starting to subsume parts of wellness and integrative medicine, like that's already happening. Like I was reflecting on this, the hospital that I've been going to since I was first hospitalized with sepsis. I've sat in like a waiting room there so many times, and this last time I was there, I'm like sitting next to this like juice bar and like integrative wellness clinic for like, and this is like a very regular just hospital. And I was like, man, we have really come a long way here. And so this is already happening, but I think like one thing that would speed up the process of bringing in the evidence-based, because I too want just evidence-based things, from the integrative medicine side of things, bringing those things into the fold. I think something that would speed that up is covering integrative medicine and functional medicine, things like that, but having insurance cover those things. I think that just making that switch will make it so much more accessible and so much less sort of fringe seeming. I think that a lot of people would want to get that type of care if it was the same. They could pay a $30 copay instead of paying $5,000 to pay out of pocket for the initial visits and then all of your testing and all that stuff. So those are sort of my three things. It's like re-education, mandatory compassion, specifically for these illnesses, even if it's just very basic, like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That'd be so much better than like, you're a liar, get out of here,
Right.
And then I think insurance covering integrative medicine or functional medicine, I think that will speed up the process of like combining the best of both of these worlds.
Sure.
That's where I would start. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I would even go further than what you're talking about. And part of the reason that I ran for United States Congress was that I've just been stymied for 20 something years in being able to get, even if you take out these poorly understood illnesses, even regular illnesses, and I don't mean it derogatorily like that, but even if you take the things that we know a lot about, it's hard as heck to get people the care that they need. And I have been just tired of trying to bang down the walls from the outside. I'm like, I want to sit in Congress and I want to write these policies. So for me, I think policy change is super important. Now, you mentioned getting coverage for some of these integrative type medicine doctors and tests and things like that. And I would envision that from a policy side of things, that the reason that we have a crappy healthcare system is because we have crappy policy in charge of our healthcare system. So for me, that's that. And, the other thing that I thought about as I was reading the book and thinking this over, and something that I also talked about a lot when I was campaigning, was we've got evidence that when women run things, we have a completely different set of priorities that are brought to the forefront. So in places where women are the CEOs of company, benefits are better, productivity is better, profits are even better. When we have legislative bodies that are run by women, we get family leave policies that are passed. We get tax-free feminine products that are passed, laws that are passed. We get extended nursing, breastfeeding benefits that are passed. So when you think about what you rightly said in this book, that a lot of these illnesses are mostly women that suffer from them, let's put women in charge of making the policies and developing the ways to solve them. Put women in charge of the NIH, put women in charge of the CDC, put women in charge of research laboratories and pharmaceutical companies. I want to get rid of them, but you understand what I'm saying is that, get more women in charge and you're going to see a complete shift in how, and not all women. There's a few that I could name out there right now that I wouldn't want to have in charge of these things, but policy change and power change for me, would be a huge component of making things better for people who suffer from these illnesses.
Yes. Hallelujah, you got my vote. Those are excellent.
Yeah, well, and the other kind of thing that I was thinking about is that as I mentioned, I have a autoimmune disorder, and I think if there were more people running things who had autoimmune disorders, we might have a different conversation. And I'm very frank. I have bad days, and I know that I have dismissed people that have had these types of illnesses in the past. I know that I've reached a level of like, I cannot fix this, and I cannot wrap my head around it anymore. But at least I have this basic background of, hey, I've been through this. don't think I've ever been a 5, but I've definitely been a 3. I've lost probably 5 years of my life to chronic illness, if you kind of aggregated it all together. And I think sometimes that helps give me a little bit different perspective on some of these things. So
there's a Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, she says, she says the people closest to the pain are the people that should be closest to the power. And I couldn't agree with that more, is that it really helps to put if you're trying to solve a problem, to make sure that like the people that are most affected by that problem are the ones that have the most outsized voice in terms of trying to come up with the right solutions, instead of people who have no idea, like no relationship to this problem. Of course, they're not going to come up with the right solutions to things. And so that just comes to mind, like when you're saying like put more people with autoimmunity or these conditions in positions of power. I think certainly when it comes to fixing what we're doing wrong with these illnesses, definitely there's a lot of pressure for the CDC. So they just put aside $1 billion, which is like so much compared for the study of long COVID, which is like normally for chronic fatigue syndrome, it's 14 million. So that's so much less. And so they put aside $1 billion, and there's a lot of pressure from the ME/CFS community to not reinvent the wheel, to go to the people who have been studying this for a long time and to really start there, to fund their research that they've been trying to get funded for so long, where they've already made a lot of progress, instead of just being like, well, nothing is known here, and let's have all of these specialists who are probably pretty like dismissive of these illnesses, let's put them in charge of researching drugs. That seems like a bad idea to me, that you want the people that really have an understanding and a relationship to these problems, you want them in charge, I would think.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting in the book, you talked a lot about cortisol and the effects of cortisol on your body, which I talk to my patients about cortisol, chronic cortisol all the time.
Yeah.
But then I had a pharmaceutical rep come in yesterday, and he was like, oh yeah, we've got a drug for hypercortisolism. And I'm like, what? And it turned out that his company and his drug are really for people who like have a findable, you can find a tumor and it's putting out cortisol. But I've seen this happen in medicine before. You start with that, and then eventually the use gets broadened, and the understanding of those syndromes gets wider and deeper. And so maybe there will be some better recognition of, you don't have to have a tumor secreting cortisol to be harmed by the constant flood of cortisol in your system when you're in a fight or flight or freeze state 24/7. So
well, there's no doubt that the moment a drug is developed that's really broadly helpful for all these problems, that suddenly they will be serious, real, important. As long as you can make money, then that's often the only stumbling block, but people are not aware of that. And
well, and I think that investing the money into these syndromes, like, it's another place where policy needs to be behind it. Right now, pharmaceutical companies are they are influencing where research dollars go and for what conditions are being studied, and they do it based on what profit they're going to make. And for me, profit in the healthcare system is a big no. Like, we need to eliminate the profit motive. That shouldn't be the incentive for how we care for people. And so I just thought it was pretty ironic that just coming up to this talk, someone was talking to me about hypercortisolism. I'm like, where did this come from all of a sudden? So,
Well, I'm going to pop in real quick and just tell everybody who's listening, please type in a question if you have one. We have a couple of people in our studio audience this evening. Do any of you all have, Misty, do you have a question? Anybody have a question back there for Sarah?
I wasn't thinking about it. I was too busy cheering on Dr. Mann with her women platform.
I can hear it.
So that we have a cheering section back here that they were cheering on Dr. Mann's policy changes. So,
yes, me too.
But we do have a question. Hold on. Okay, so Karen would like to know, how do we get medical schools to take these topics seriously?
I still go back to, I think it needs to be different people running the medical school. Like, it's largely older white men who are in charge of running schools, and it's pervasive in all of our systems, not just in medicine, where the majority of CEOs and the majority of high level people are men, and you're going to always have an emphasis on male issues and male diseases. And I have a lot of friends who are men and who run businesses and run companies and who are in legislative bodies, and they care, but they don't care. Like you can't do it when it's not your experience. And if we had a balance where we had 50-50, or, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, when there are 9, like if women ran everything for 264 years like men have, then, we would be in a different place. But I really think that at the medical school level, at the residency level, we have to have different people in charge, people who are understanding of and willing to admit that we don't know enough about XYZ disease. And that's hard for people in medicine to do. It's the hardest thing for us to say we don't know.
Do you have
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the people that, in my experience, the people that are always more willing in medicine to say I don't know are the female doctors. There is just, maybe just like used to being told that all the time. I don't know, like that that they're wrong, but women are so much more tolerant of like the hit on your ego that comes from saying I don't know, whereas so many male doctors like behave as if like they are going to shatter and blow away in the wind if they just have to say I don't know. And that to me is like very problematic. Like that should be something that you know that you have to take care of within yourself. If you're going to go into this profession, you have to be able to be humble and to say I don't know. That has to be like part of the gig, because you can't know everything. And so
and I think some of the culture of training makes us not be that way. Like when you're in residency, you're expected to know the answers from all the people that are just throwing questions at you nonstop. Right. When I have students in my office, I tell them, you're not going to know the answers to the questions I ask you, but you're going to remember the answers from now for the rest of your life because you didn't know it when I asked you. And that's a good thing. To be able to say, I don't know, is a fine thing.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah. Or even to just say like, I know that the right thing to say here is, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry this happened to you. It's terrible. And not very much is known about these illnesses. I do know what to do here. Yeah. Like, that's fine. That's fine to feel confident that is like way, way above pretending like you do know and that you know that the person is a nonsense person, right? So that, yeah. But in terms of how to get medical schools to change, I do think another piece of that is that in other illnesses that have faced like real challenges, like I think of like the AIDS epidemic, and like that there was so much advocacy and activism and like getting the AIDS community, but then the AIDS community reaching out to the health community to create this enormous movement for change. To, I remember when I was a kid, like going down to the mall and like quilting the patches for the AIDS quilt, and like that was laid out on the entire mall. And like, so I think that getting engaged, like if you're a healthy person, like getting engaged in like ME Action is a big advocacy organization for ME/CFS, and looking at that is like a really noble, worthwhile thing to do, because that is often how things change, is because of this like grassroots activist pressure from the community, where it just eventually gets to the point where it's no longer tolerable to be bigoted and terrible, right? Like, but that takes a lot of social pressure. And so that involves like people that are not sick in this way getting involved and trying to be part of changing the way that these patients are treated.
So we have a couple of questions, and there's 2 here, and I'm going to make them like a part 1 and part 2. So Laura would like to know, what do you see as the role of rehab professionals in supporting WOMIs? And then Courtney would like to know, what's the best way to support a loved one who is a WOMI? So if you could both maybe weigh in on that.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So for rehab, do we mean like physical? Well, so I'll just... Yeah, so it really depends on the person, because there's so much kind of diversity in terms of the types, the ways that these things present. And so So I don't have a great answer as like a blanket answer for that question. But in terms of, I do know a lot about loved ones and relating to loved ones and supporting a person that you love that has these problems. Often, so I think I'll just speak to the ableds, to the healthies among us. It always often falls to this, with these illnesses, falls to the sick person to educate everyone around them, to organize all of the support around them, and to do basically all of the work that is for a different type of illness. That is not what happens. Like if you are diagnosed with cancer, you're not the one that's like getting the casserole committee together to like bring by food and to organize support and do all these things. Usually there's like one designated person that's like, I'm going to write the emails to all of our friends and family. And then there are things that they're the ones that are really asking for the support to come in whatever ways people have to give. And it's, again, particular to each person's situation. Like they might need a GoFundMe to raise funds for whatever medications or for treatment, or they just really need love and support because nobody believes that they're sick, and they really, really need people to love and support them. It is so hard to ask for that yourself of your own friends and family. Like, friends and family, I need you to stop treating me poorly. I need you to stop treating me like I'm invisible, is a very difficult thing to ask for. And most people, especially if you're really sick and you don't have the energy, cannot do that. And so it is such a service and a mitzvah to do that for the person that you love, to be the person that writes the email or the social media posts, or starts the GoFundMe, or whatever it is, to recognize, even if you can't do it all by yourself, to talk to a couple of people in your family and say, here is a way we can really help. We can organize support. And especially the type of support in this particular family of illnesses, where the main thing that you're giving to the person is like the thing that's the easiest and free, is to just witness them, is to just reflect back to them what we've said over and over again on this call, which is, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. That is terrible. You're strong. Like, I'm here for you. I'm always here to listen if you need me. If you want to just dump it all on me, I'm here for you. All these things, like, that is such a help to somebody like me, to have other people proactively come to me instead of me having to be like going around with my little like tin, like asking for support and for affirmation, and like that's not a great feeling. And so that's what I would recommend. It's like the number one thing you can do to kind of help somebody with this everything. And to know that it's kind of an ongoing, that you might do that like when it starts to die down again in a year, if people have kind of fallen away, to like bring people back in again. It's like, she may be dealing with this for a very long time, but we love this person, and it's not hard to say, that sucks. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. Like, let's like just text, how you're feeling or something like that. That's no skin off most people's nose.
And then also, Sarah, we have another question. What are your thoughts on dynamic neural retraining? One of our viewers suffers from MCAS, and that helped them.
Yeah. So for anybody that doesn't know, there's a couple different programs, like the Gupta program and Annie Hopper's program, where it's a very rigorous sort of brain retraining program that is predicated on the idea of neuroplasticity, that you can train your brain to respond differently and to respond better in a healthier way. And so when it comes to these illnesses, like, I am somebody that definitely believes that one of the main things that's going wrong here is this like maladaptive response in the limbic system, that like the brain is just no longer responding to normal stimuli properly. I don't think that's the only thing that's happening, but that is clearly part of it. Like, and so theoretically, I understand how something like brain retraining. I can't talk when I'm trying to say brain retraining. Brain retraining has a lot in common with something like doing ayahuasca, or even just like meditation, or all these things that are actually kind of getting at the same thing, which is like your brain's response to stimuli. And so what these brain retraining programs are, they're very, very, very intensive, and they're hard. Like, I have done them. I did not get better, and I could see what it's doing. You're basically like training and tricking your brain to think like the thing that you're responding to, and having like all of these huge reactions to my body, not just like mentally, but like all these physical reactions, that it's, I'm safe, it's okay. Like, that's basically what's going on there. I can see how that works, and I totally believe everybody that's gotten better doing that. But I think it's important to say that, like, it's very difficult, and B, I know a lot of people who it didn't work for. And so again, I always find myself in this, like, it's like being a politician, like you're trying to hold like the caucuses together, like alienate the moderates or the progressives. Like, I kind of feel that way about all these different types of treatments. Is like, okay, so if we can see that it's clearly is helping some people, like somebody I care about a lot who was really, really sick, did that program and is like better 100%. And so that to me, that matters. And I know it's not just that one anecdote. I know a lot of people that have gotten a lot better, but I know a lot of people who have not gotten a lot better. And so, it's just, how do we take seriously that this is a really tricky problem that we really don't understand yet, and like dignify that it works for some people. And so that means, like, if you're interested in doing something that's that difficult, you should do it. You should feel like encouraged in doing it. But if it doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean that you didn't try hard enough, that there's something wrong with you, that and also like that, like, if you did something else that made you better, that like somehow that wasn't right. Like, a lot of people I know that healed what's going on in their gut, that made them 100% better. And so it's a very complex, I read about this a lot in the book, about, well, how do we put all these things together? So for brain retraining specifically, I think if you're up for it, it's really worth trying, but it is really difficult. But I always say, I'm like, I'll try anything, because like I would really prefer to not feel this way. And so as long as I don't have to do it forever, like if it's a diet, I usually look at it like, okay, well, I don't really do a lot of new diets now, but when I was doing that, I would say, well, I'll do it for 30 days or 60 days. I'll give it my all. But if it didn't work, I'm not going to like keep doing it for a year and be like, if I just keep going, if I just keep trying harder and harder and harder, it'll work. I think that's a very damaging sort of way to think about things. And so it's just important, like, if you do it, you don't have to do it forever. You should give it your all if you are going to do it. Don't half-ass it, because then it's not worth doing it all. But you don't have to do it forever, and it's definitely not your fault if it doesn't work.
Yep, that's great. Well, we've gone over a little bit, and I don't want to take up more of your time, Sarah, but I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and y'all did not disappoint. And I have to say that this conversation is exactly why I wanted to open a bookstore. And I can't thank you both enough for putting Dr. Mann for the time and the care and the effort you took in researching this, and being thorough with reading the book, and Sarah just being so generous with your time and your expertise in something you don't really want to be an expert in, but you are. And so that's going to help a lot of people. And just to kind of close, I want to let everybody know that we do have copies of Sarah's book in both hardback and paperback here at the store, and we do ship if you want to call us. But we also have a store on bookshop.org, a Lark and Owl online store. And if you don't know bookshop.org, find out about it, because it is the indie bookstore's answer to Amazon. And you can get anything you want, and we get the proceeds if you order it from our little page on that site. So if you live elsewhere outside of Georgetown or the Austin area, Lark and Owl can still be your local bookstore if you go to bookshop.org. And we'd love for you to follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter on our website at www.larkinowlbooksellers.com. And a lot of people ask, well, how else can we help? And one thing I always try to remember to say is support the authors, not just by buying their books from indie bookstores, but follow them on social media. As you heard in the introduction to Sarah's life, she is a social media expert as well. So she's great on social media. You won't be sorry if you follow her, and you'll be entertained and informed. So we have a few more events coming up. We'd love for y'all to keep track of on our social media page. One of them is with Penguin Random House and Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yes, that one. So look for that and join us for that evening if you'd like to. We're very excited about that. And a couple of other things that are going to hit our calendar soon. So Sarah, can I just say again, you are a phenomenal writer on something that's very difficult, I think, to explain, to write about, and to educate people on, and still maintain connection, compassion, and your sense of self. And I think you did a beautiful job on that. And kudos to you. So everybody, thanks again for joining us. Stay healthy and good night. And Sarah, if you ever get on a plane and want to come to Texas, we'd roll out the red carpet for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. This has been such a joy for me. So thank you for having me, and thank you for Dr. Mann for being such a wonderful interviewer. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Okay.